Okay, so what I thought I'd do, since I think you didn't want a lot of extra actual material to work on, is I thought maybe I would give a little bit of a lecture about the solo in something to kind of help you understand musically what's going on. What I have found over the years is that there is the mechanical side of playing, the building up technique, and that is all very important. You wanna spend time doing that, just simply practicing and working up your technique. Um, but overall, I think what most people lack is really an understanding of what they're playing. So what I'm going to do is kind of analyze the solo from something. And though I don't think it's important that you technically, theoretically, however you want to word it, fully understand exactly what's going on, I think it's good for you to understand the concept and why certain notes work in a solo and how solos are built and musically why they make sense. So that's kind of what I'm going to talk about. And I'm also going to give you the rest of the solo simply because there's not much there. I'm not even going to send you a tab on it. I'm just going to show you how to do it and let you tab it out yourself because there's just not that much left. Okay, so I'm going to basically take this measure by measure. So in the solo, the first chord is C. And then we have these notes up here. Okay, so what's going on there is the last three notes of that four-note phrase. These two notes here, those notes are actually in the C chord. If you were to play a C bar chord up here on the 8th fret, you would see that those two notes are actually in the chord. So what we have is we have this D note on the 7th fret that hammers on to the 9th, which is a chord tone. So you see we have this little teeny bit of tension. This note isn't in the chord. To a note that is in the chord, another note that's in the chord, and another note that's in the chord. So when you're building a solo, very often what happens is you have this idea that's called tension and release. And tension is simply notes that are not in the chord. Okay? Depending on how the note is played and depending on what the note is that isn't in the chord, you get varying degrees of tension. In this particular phrase, you don't have a lot of tension. The note that isn't in the chord doesn't last very long. It goes right to the note that's in the chord. And the phrase ends on a note that's in the chord. When we look at the next measure, we see we have that same hammer on. And then we go up to the 10th fret of the B string. We play that note twice. That note isn't in the chord, so that's creating a little teeny bit of tension. But then we come back to the notes that are in the chord. Right there and there again. So we end, once again, on notes that are in the chord. Now that doesn't mean when you're playing a solo that all of your phrases have to end on notes that are in the chord. I'm just pointing out that in this particular solo they are. And that the notes that aren't in the chord create a little bit of tension, and that tension is not meant to be, the word tension isn't meant to be taken negatively. It's simply referring to the fact that the note isn't in the chord and your ear kind of wants the note to go back to a note that's in the chord. Now like all is right with the world. And we come back to the notes that are in the chord over that C major 7 chord. The next chord is C7. We have that same hammer again to a note that's in the chord. Then we have that chord tone and that little bit of tension. A little bit of tension because of two things. The note doesn't sound bad against the chord, and the note that's creating the tension doesn't last a long time. That note there comes right back to that chord tone. Continuing on with this measure, we go up to that B flat. Now that B flat note is in fact the 7 right there in the C7 chord. So that's actually a chord tone. And that note there is C, so that's also a chord tone. We have this little bit of momentary tension, 10-8. That 10 is not a chord tone, but once again it comes right back to a chord tone. So in that phrase we have tension, chord tone, tension, chord tone, chord tone, chord tone, chord tone, little bit of tension, back to the chord tone. So from the beginning, ending on a chord tone there, coming back to the chord tone and ending on a chord tone. Chord tone, chord tone, chord tone, ending on a chord tone. Now we go to the F major 7. We come up to this 12th fret, this high E note. Now that's an E note and the chord is F major 7, but that's a chord tone because it is in fact the major 7. When you play an F major 7 chord, you have this open E string in that, so this is simply an octave higher. Comes down to a little bit of tension, a chord tone, and a chord tone. So in that 12, 10, 8, 10, 3 of those notes are chord tones. Then we have the 10, 8, 8 with that little slide. Those notes that you're actually playing are chord tones in the F major 7. There they are in the chord, the G string and the B string. We have that little slide. Then we go to the A7 chord, and when we play the 9, 8, 8, those notes are actually chord tones for the A7. So we have those are chord tones in the F major 7. The E, the G, and the G are chord tones in the A7. So far what we've seen, and once again, keep in mind, not all solos are going to analyze and break down the same way. I think what you can see here is that we have an awful lot of chord tones in this particular solo. There is not a lot of tension. That's pretty standard for a ballad. Ballads tend to be pretty songs, and the solos tend to follow suit. You know, the ballad tries to create a certain feeling and emotion, and So we don't want a lot of tension and discord necessarily in the solo to kind of break the mood, so to speak. So I would say that so far this the way George constructed this is good. The other thing that we don't know, I'm going to guess, and I've never read anything on it, there might be information. I'm going to guess that this was not an improvised solo. It has a lot of good form to it, so I'm thinking that George may have worked this solo out in advance and then recorded it. Once again, that's just a guess on my part. Continuing on, we get to the D7 chord, where we start on this A note. Now that, if you play this D7 here, we can see that that note is a chord tone, the 2nd fret. And then we have a little bit of tension, going back to the chord tone. And then we slide up to this 7th fret, that's a D note. The chord is still D7. And then 2 F sharp notes. Those are also chord tones in the D7 chord. So once again, lots of chord tones. In the start of that phrase, we only have one note that's not a chord tone. That's the 2nd note, that 4 going back to the 2. Then we go up to the B note. That's not a chord tone, but it comes right back to the 10th fret, which is a chord tone, right there. If you were to play a D7 chord right there, you'd pick up that chord tone, that A note. We get to the G, and we're playing so we have chord tone, tension, chord tone, tension, chord tone for the A minor 7. When we get to that A minor 7, there's that G note, except up here. The next phrase, where we're on the G chord with the B in the bass, we start on this D. Here we have probably the most tension in this part of the solo, because it goes from the D note, which is a chord tone, to a D flat, which is not a chord tone, to a C, which is not a chord tone, to a B flat, which is not a chord tone, to an E, which is not a chord tone, to an E flat, which is not a chord tone, to the D, which is a chord tone. So it starts on the D. Okay, so we have all that extra tension in there, but once again, that phrase starts on a chord tone and ends on a chord tone. So that kind of makes it all right with the world there again, because even though your ear is hearing that tension, you're releasing that tension by coming back to the chord tone. So that, like I said, that tension release principle is an extremely important concept in soloing. It's really what happens all the time. Different levels of tension. Once again, the tension is caused by primarily 2 things, more than 2, but primarily by 2. Notes that aren't in the chord, and how long the note that isn't in the chord lasts. For the most part, all of George's notes that aren't in the chord don't last very long, so you're getting that resolution coming back to the chord. I'll also stress that the tension, once again, is a very good thing, because without the notes that aren't in the chord solos would be really, really, really boring. Okay? So once again, look at it as a good thing. Now I'm going to just kind of show you how to play the next part of the solo. That's where we get to that A minor, to the that's when you're playing the arrangement. Right, that series of chords there, A minor major 7, A minor 7, A minor 6. We're going to talk a lot about those chords too, but not in this lesson because I don't want to muddy the water. So that's the part where you hear those bends. Now you can play those bends in one of two places. You can play them down here in first position, and what you would do is you'd be on the B string, the 3rd fret, and you'd play that note and you'd bend it up and down. So the minute you pick it, then you bend it up. 1 and 2 and 3 and then you do a pull off to the 1st finger. So that's all done with one pick. Okay, so the first time it lasts, like I said, that to slow it down, 1 and 2 and 3 and then pulling off. And then we basically do the same thing the second time. The third time is just quick, just 2 of them, 1 and 2 and. So the first time you have the A minor chord, the A minor major 7, the A minor 7. Third time is just the, okay? After we do that third one, then what we do is we slide the ring finger from the 3rd fret of the B string up to the 5th. And then we play the 3rd fret of the G. So playing that last bend, 1 and 2 and 3. So I'm going to play that entire section about here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay? After we play that, then we're going to take that ring finger and start on the 5th fret and slide it all the way up to the 12th. Bring the ring finger back to the 10th fret. Play the 8th fret, 10th fret, 8th fret. So that's going to sound like this. So once again, we have the first bend, second bend, third one, which is quicker, and then he goes back and plays the little theme that we hear at the beginning. You can go down, you can either come up to the 10th fret of the B string, so you'd want to land that with your first finger. So we're playing the first finger on the 10th fret of the B string, bending up the 12th fret bringing it back down, back to the first finger. 11th fret, 12th fret, and then it goes back into the melody. Okay, so I'm going to play that entire section again. 3, 4, 1. I went up to the C note there at the very end. I'll play that again, even slower. 2, 3, 4. And that's where the vocal comes back in. Okay? So, that's not a lot more. Hopefully I explained. If I didn't explain that clear enough, or you'd actually rather I just sent you a quick tab on that, maybe I'll end up doing that anyway, even though I just got done telling you that I'm not going to send you a tab on that. Maybe I'll just add it to this here and just send it along anyway. Okay? If you're wondering about the different roof here, we're visiting one of Cheryl's daughters up in Bothell, up in Washington, and we're staying in a little, like a little mother-in-law cottage that they have, and that's the ceiling of the room. Okay, so I will, like I said, after all my preaching about not sending a tab on that, I'll quick tab that out and send that along too. Any questions, you know what to do. Hope you're enjoying it. Give me a little text or Marco Polo. Give me your reaction to just playing the solo and how you feel about, learning that kind of thing. So I know going forward, if you're going to be interested in anything like this in the future, because if it's totally just not your thing, we will avoid it and stick more to the other kind of thing that we're doing. But even if you haven't really enjoyed it or whatever, it still, I think, helps round you out musically, which is really something that I'm after when I'm teaching, is not just technical, not just showing where to put fingers, and I really want people to develop their musicality and draw out their individual talent and train their ear and increase their understanding musically as much as I can. That's the point of all of this, and I hope you do get some of that out of this. Okay, have a good one.